Hello again, everybody. Welcome to another edition of the app. I have to say this every time we do this. The app has nothing to do with computers. The app in this case stands for ArkLaTex People and Politics. My name is Jeff Beimfohr. Our special guest today, State Representative Michael Melerine. He represents District 6. Mike, thanks for being with us.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Appreciate that. I've never called you Mike. That just slipped out. Is that okay?
It's fine. Look,
it's always Michael.
Yeah, most people call me Michael, but it's fine.
Well, this was very timely. We were going to talk about this stuff anyway, about insurance. We're getting ready to go into regular session in just a few days. And obviously, insurance is probably going to be one of the big topics down in Baton Rouge.
Absolutely.
And on the day that we're recording this podcast, Governor Landry decided to hold a news conference about his ideas for insurance reform. And it went on and on and on. And he had a lot of ideas. I think there were 4 major points that he made, and then a lot of little points that tailed off from there. But I know you saw some of his speech. I just wanted to get your overall reaction. Yeah,
look, last year I had some legislation that was tailored at addressing this issue.
Right.
The governor chose to veto one of those pieces of legislation.
He did.
One of the other pieces died in committee in the Senate. That one I'm bringing back this year.
Which one is that?
The Housley presumption bill.
Okay. Yeah, I was going to ask you about that.
He talked about it a little bit today, but I'm bringing the Housley bill back, and some other people have picked up the mantle and tried a little bit different approach on my collateral source bill this year.
Well, the Housley says if you have a wreck, that you can't just anything that is wrong with somebody is presumed to have been caused by the wreck, which is, I guess that seems to be unfair, right?
Yeah, so it basically flips the burden. So most people, you think about it, if you file a lawsuit, generally it's your responsibility to prove what you're alleging. Right now, the Supreme Court back in the early 90s flipped it on its head and said in some cases, in most cases actually, it's the defense's job to prove almost the negative, to prove that it was caused by something else.
Yeah.
To my knowledge, we're the only state in the country that has that presumption. As the governor said today in his press conference, the previous term, the legislature passed it, sent it to the governor's desk, and it was vetoed by the previous governor.
Yeah.
So I'm encouraged to hear him say that he would support it. I worked with his office last year and over between last session and this session to make sure we could come up with a bill that, achieved what we were trying to achieve, but also at the same time was fair. And I think we're there. Okay.
That's good. That's good to hear because it's hard to prove a negative, right?
It's one of the hardest things in the world to do is to prove a negative. And so all we're doing is saying if you're going to make these allegations and you're going to claim this accident caused these injuries, you should have the responsibility and the burden of proving it. It shouldn't be flipped, and it shouldn't be the other side's responsibility.
Which in turn then generates claims, which generates higher premiums for everybody else.
Yeah, it's one cause of it.
Yeah. And the other thing was your collateral source bill, which I've talked to many of your colleagues sitting in that very chair. And I talked to you so many times last year, and every time I talked to you, I said, please explain collateral source. And you did, and you did, and you did, and I'm still not sure I understood it. So one more time, please explain it.
No, so look, this is one of those things that's complicated. Even if you're an attorney, and unless you practice in that field, it's very confusing. Even then, it's still confusing.
Yeah.
So essentially, what the bill, the version that Rep. Glorioso has this year, what it says is that we're going to bring transparency to it. And so if you're billed at, let's say, $1,000, and you have insurance, and your insurance comes in and has a negotiated rate with the provider, and they say, we'll pay you $250 for that. Currently, the jury or the trier of fact only sees the $1,000 bill. They don't see the fact that the insurance company had paid only $250. So you get $750 in that example. The difference between what was billed and what was actually paid. Currently, you can take 40% of the difference, and that's what you're awarded. So you get your $250 that you were paid. And then you take 40% of the $750, and you get that on top of the $250. So you're made whole plus some. And so my bill originally started off last year that said you get what you pay. That's it. It went through a few different versions. I think ultimately the version that we ended up at was 30% and it had a few other tweaks in it. This year's version by Rep. Glorioso says jury gets to see everything. They get to see what is paid. They get to see what was billed. So they can see everything. And it's up to the jury to say, do you get what was paid or do you get all the way up to what was billed? And the jury is going to have the ability to make that determination. It allows for things such as, look, if there's an extenuating circumstance. I don't know, for example, you've got an injury and you went to the best doctor in the world to fix that injury. And he may charge a little bit more than the insurance. If that's something, then you could do it. But it also allows the defense to come in and say, look, the reasonable rate or the customary rate in the area. So if you've got 10 doctors in the area that perform a procedure and they're able to get the bills from 10 doctors, if the one that you went to is just exceedingly an outlier, like way more expensive than everybody else, the jury can see that. And the jury or the trier of fact gets to see what everybody is, and you get to put on evidence, and then it's up to them. And I think that's the fairest way to do it is to allow the jury or the trier of fact to say, okay, we know you billed 10 times more than everybody else, and we don't think that's reasonable.
Okay.
And then allows them to come in and say, no, like we're not going to do it.
Well, the idea is that you suffer an injury, you should be made whole, but you shouldn't make a profit, I guess.
You don't get a windfall from it. That's the simplest thing is, look, I'm all for making everybody whole. We don't want to take it and make somebody not whole. And unfortunately, a lot of times when you're injured, the only way we've come up with as a society to try to make you whole is through money. And medical bills are one way where, look, if you're going to be forced to pay, let's make sure you get your money back so you're not out of pocket.
Right.
But you shouldn't be getting that extra windfall for no reason except you went to a doctor that has a bill that's whatever percent more. And it leads to higher settlements, higher verdicts, because we know, and you can talk to people that do this type of work. One of the senators said it last year in committee. They absolutely tie how much they ask for in pain and suffering. It's called general damages. So like your traumas, your injuries, things that really aren't able to put a price tag on. They tie that to the medicals. So if you have higher medicals, they ask for more money in pain and suffering. And we know that those bills, in most cases, aren't going to be paid, like the billed amount is not what's actually paid.
Right.
And so it just drives up the cost of everything. And that's what we're trying to come in. You want to talk about lowering premiums, that's one way you can do it.
Well, look, last year, everybody seemed to think your bill should have passed, and that includes the insurance commissioner, Tim Temple. He sat here and said that he disagreed with the governor's veto. Today, the governor talked about that in his news conference. He said he believes that bill didn't address the problem, and it took the rights away from those who were legitimately injured. I'm not sure I get that. Do you get that?
The governor and I can agree to disagree on that.
Okay.
I don't think it would have done that. As I just said, I think it would have allowed everybody to be made whole, but it would have cut down on that windfall. And look, my bill that was introduced was not the bill that he ended up vetoing. It went through, as you know, went through a process.
Iterations.
And it was amended a few times and things like that. But I'm really confident that Rep. Glorioso's bill this year will go and address that issue. I know the governor a few times today mentioned about Texas.
He did.
A few different
I was going to ask
times.
you about that,
My only caution there is you got to be very careful when you start saying one state does something this way and they do this way. Because what makes a legal system isn't just that one bill or that one law that they're talking about. It's everything. You have to look at it holistically. You can't start cherry picking. We're going to take this and do it like this state does, or we're going to do this because this state does it. For example, there's a bill by one of my colleagues, Rep. Chenevier, that deals with modified comparative fault. So right now in Louisiana, you can be 99% at fault and you can file a lawsuit and you can recover that 1%. So you would be entitled to recover 1%. Texas says if you were 50% or more at fault, you don't get to recover anything. So
quite a difference.
It's quite a difference. Rep. Chenevier has a bill to bring us in line with Texas. Having talked with the governor, he's not in support of that. He doesn't like that idea. In the past, Louisiana moved away from it, but Louisiana's version of it was if you were 1% at fault, you couldn't recover anything. And that wasn't fair. Somebody could be 99% at fault, and just because you were 1% at fault, you couldn't recover.
Right.
So we went away from that, went to the pure comparative fault.
Okay.
And if you look, I want to say about 38 states, somewhere in that region, say if you're more than 50% at fault, you don't get to recover.
Wow.
So I say that to say that is a reason, part of the reason why Texas's insurance systems and their court systems are set up differently than ours.
Okay.
So if you start cherry picking the collateral source rule,
Right.
he mentioned he wanted to go to more of a Texas collateral source rule. If you do that, you got to be very careful, because part of the reason why Texas's system may work is because of the modified comparative fault aspect, where somebody that's more than 50% doesn't get to play. That's one example.
Yeah.
Their entire jury system's completely different than Louisiana.
Well, the governor, and we have a little chunk of the governor's news conference.
Yeah.
He talks about taking a balanced approach, and so let's just go ahead and play this sound. You can judge for yourself some of the things the governor has to say here, and then we'll come out and we'll talk about it. Go ahead, Greg, and roll that sound.
It is actually time for this building to respond in fairness and accountability. And again, bring fairness and accountability into the process. Because again, for far too long inside of this very building, there has been a battle waged between insurance companies and trial lawyers. And where those who are behind me are forced to choose. And let me be clear, I believe both sides have plenty of blame to go around. So today, I'm not here to help any lawyers, and I'm not here to help any insurance companies. I'm here to help the citizens of this state. And so I plan to work on legislation with those behind me to hold both sides accountable. And what I would suggest is a balanced approach that has never been taken place in this building. Never before has the legislature looked at insurance and said, we're going to take a balanced approach. And I believe that it is the only way to bring you relief. To confirm what I believe, I recently went into the field and polled the citizens of our state, and the results that came back tell me that they agree. They agree that both lawyers and insurance companies are equally to blame. They also believe that bad or uninsured drivers are to blame. Those are the top 3 items that our citizens believe basically increase the cost of their automobile insurance. And so again, I refuse to travel down a continual failed road. And so I'm going to again suggest that we take a balanced approach. Instead of passing laws that deal with one side of the scale, under which we've done again and again and again with no relief, I say we adjust the scales. We add fairness and we add accountability. And so here's what the data says. The data says that our accident frequency in this state is in line with the national average. We don't have more car crashes than any other state. We're pretty much in line with the rest of the nation. Our cost to repair those vehicles, again, is in line with the rest of the state. This next data point, I will tell you, shocked even me, because contrary to what we have been told, our injury claim severity is less than the national average. Okay, it's less than the national average. The amount of severe injuries that Louisianans receive in automobile accidents is less than the national average. That, I'll be honest, was a shock even to me. The only outlier in the numbers is minor injury claims, under which Louisiana is almost double the national average.
Well, that was part of Governor Jeff Landry's news conference on the day that we record this podcast about, I guess, challenging the legislature and trial lawyers and everybody else involved in this equation, getting to get the rates down. Called for a balanced approach from trial attorneys and lawmakers and everybody else. Your reaction to what you just watched?
Yeah, Look, the last data point that he had is the key out of all of those.
Okay.
The minor injury claim frequency is double the national average. That means you're twice as likely to have a claim filed following an accident in Louisiana as you are anywhere else in the state, in the country.
Okay.
And if you look at the average payout per claim for bodily injury in Louisiana, it's probably double the national average. It's high.
Okay.
It's above the national average.
Wow.
And that right there is your largest problem, or one of your largest problems.
Yeah.
We're not hitting $100 million verdicts all the time. We're not hitting what's called a nuclear verdict as often as maybe some other places. But what you're doing is you're dying death by 1,000 cuts. You've got a bunch of minimum limit policies, which is minimum limits is $15,000. And Housley plays into it. But there are a number of factors and a number of things that play into why it's so easy to file a claim and why it's so easy to get $5,000, $10,000, $15,000 for a minor injury, where there's no visible damage to your car, where there's, if there is damage, it's not a lot. It's those little claims, which I'm with him. Like, we need to figure out what that's for.
Yeah.
We need to figure out how to address it. But look, I'll tell you now, if there's something that an insurance company is doing wrong and it needs to be addressed, by all means, let's address it.
Sure.
But we need to look at, seriously, why is it that we file those claims at twice the rate of everybody else?
Because they feel like they didn't get the money for them, right? That's it.
And I mean, in my practice, in my day job, you can see cases where somebody's got 10 accidents, 5 accidents, and every time it's a $5,000, $10,000, $15,000 payout.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just, it's a condition. I think people have seen billboards everywhere, and I know he talked about today about it.
I'm gonna ask you about that here in just a minute.
Yeah.
Finish your thought.
I haven't had a chance to look at that bill, but I know he said in his press conference today that it was passed by the legislature and it was vetoed under the prior administration. I want to look into it a little bit more and see, but I know Rep. Carver that's bringing that bill.
Kim Carver.
He's a good friend. Is it going to solve all of our problems? Maybe not. Is it a good step to start to do it? Yeah.
Yeah.
So let's go.
You know what Moon Griffon says about steps in the right direction.
He does. Right? He does. And look, that brings us to a bigger point of this entire conversation. If you go and you talk to citizens of Louisiana, and it's not just me and my colleagues, we talk and compare what we're hearing when we go back home. Everybody says we need to fix insurance. Now, if you talk to people from North Louisiana, especially our region, it's more we need to fix auto insurance. If you talk to people in South Louisiana, it's a little bit more we need to talk about homeowners and things.
Sure.
But across the board, the number one issue for 50% of Louisiana citizens is insurance of some sort.
Yeah.
And the rates are getting too high. I mean, we talk about everything else. We talk about improving education, talk about attracting businesses. We talk about the tax structure and tax overhauls.
Right.
All that's great, and it plays into it. But insurance is kind of that last thing that we haven't tried to tackle, and we need to do it, and we don't need to take a step. It's not, the time for a step has passed.
Yeah.
It's time for
several steps or one giant step.
A giant step, a giant leap. We need to do that because that's going to start being what holds us back as a state. When you can go to Texas, which from here is about 20 minutes.
Right.
And you can go to Arkansas, which is about an hour. From Texarkana, about an hour and a half, whatever, with traffic. And you can live there and you can work here if you want to, but you can live in another state and you could pay a whole lot less in insurance.
Yeah.
And it's that cost of living that's going to keep people from coming here, and we've got to address it.
Well, the governor in his news conference did talk about that advertising from the trial attorneys. You know the ones, they're obvious, we won't mention any names, but he said he was tired of, what did he say, he was tired of the Lizard and Morris Bart.
Yeah.
I've had Morris Bart on shows before, so I feel comfortable mentioning his.
Yeah.
But he basically was saying what we want to do is have a law, I guess, that does not allow the enormous costs of all this advertising to be passed on into premium costs. Obviously, you would probably agree with that.
Yeah, look, he mentioned today again that Texas has a similar law. I want to look and see what Texas's law is to make sure that we're not doing something that's completely out of line. But yeah, if we're an outlier in that case, and that's what it is, like I said, let's look and see what we can do to bring. At the end of the day, that's the goal. That's the goal.
Yeah.
Is to bring premiums down, make insurance more affordable for everybody.
Right. You also touched on uninsured drivers. The governor said that was a big problem, and talked about exclusionary limits from $15,000 to up to $100,000.
Yeah.
So what does that do?
So right now we have something called no pay, no play.
Okay.
And what it says is if you are injured and you don't have minimum limit coverage, which is right now 15,000, it's 1530 policy is what it's called.
Okay.
If you don't have the minimum coverage, then you waive your right to recover the first $15,000 of your claim. Proposal from Rep. DeWitt in Central Louisiana area would raise that to $100,000.
Okay.
So if you don't have insurance, you waive your first $100,000 in bodily injury coverage.
So if you don't have at least that much, you're wasting your time.
No, and it would say if you don't have minimum limits. So
Okay.
you just have to have the minimum limits of
Okay.
1530. And if you don't, look, Louisiana law requires you to have insurance. If you choose not to follow the law and not to have insurance on your vehicle and you're driving around on the roads, then yeah, you should suffer a penalty if you
Right.
get into an accident. You shouldn't be rewarded for it.
Oh, well, that makes perfect sense. All right, so we've talked about we haven't solved it, but I think we've made we have some good points here. But the governor is basically throwing down the gauntlet, right? He's issuing a challenge not just to lawmakers, but to the trial attorneys and the insurance companies and everybody involved in this. This is the time, as you said, to stop holding Louisiana back. Time to get this thing done.
Yeah, and look, there's a whole package of bills. The governor today talked about a few of them, but there's an entire package of bills out there that my colleagues that are in their first term in the House, most of us ran on, especially everybody in South Louisiana. And last year we tackled the property side. We passed some property reform.
And those were good. I mean, those were very good.
Those are working. Look, it was based off of, in part, what Florida did. And if you look at what Florida has done, Florida passed it about 2 years ahead of us. They're starting to see their property insurance rates come down.
Yeah.
Just this year in Louisiana, since those laws have gone into effect, and not all of them are in effect yet, but since they've passed, I was talking to the insurance commissioner this week, 8 companies have asked for a rate reduction this year on homeowners.
That's good. That's
it's
great.
There.
Yeah.
It's working. So it's not the time to go back and say, oh, well, this didn't work because we're 8, 10 months, 11 months, whatever it is since we went into effect.
Yeah.
It is working, and we're going to continue to see that. But we have to stay the course. We have to go in and continue to reform. We can't say, oh, we did it, we're done. Give up, pat ourselves on the back
Right.
and say, hey, we did it. We haven't. We've that in the property side, not just a small step. We have taken a giant leap forward. But we need to continue it. We need to continue to work on it, which we are, and we'll continue to see relief.
And one of the things the governor talked about in his news conference was the insurance commissioner, and not specifically Tim Temple, but he was basically talking about the office itself, and that the insurance felt that the insurance commissioner didn't have the power to hold, I guess, the insurance companies accountable to their word. In other words, I guess they say we're going to do a rate reduction or whatever, and then go ahead and do something different. And then the commissioner didn't have the authority to hold them accountable for their original statements. So I'm assuming what he's saying is the commissioner needs to have more power.
Yeah, and look, the commissioner has power right now to determine that rates aren't actuarially justified.
Okay.
And if he does that, he can say, no, you can't raise rates, or no, you got to lower rates because it's not justified. I want to caution anybody that says we need to give an insurance commissioner unilateral authority to do certain things.
Okay.
And look at California.
Yeah.
California has put in place some regulations and rules that have exacerbated their property and casualty insurance market to the point where, given the fires that they've just experienced, I don't know if it's sustainable. And they're facing serious issues right now. And State Farm went in and said, look, we need to cover these losses from these fires. And the insurance commissioner, who has authority, very broad authority, just said, no, we're not doing it. The citizens of California may end up having to eat and cover a lot of those costs. What we don't want is to do that.
Yeah.
We don't want to come in and end up in a spot where when we do have a major hurricane or a major tornado or something, or a flood, whatever it is that may be, some natural disaster that comes in, we don't want to be put in that spot where California's at. So we need to be very careful when we start coming in and tweaking these laws to balance making sure that rates are low, making sure that companies are not overcharging, but also making sure that they are properly reserved and they are covered in case a major natural disaster does happen. So that way everybody doesn't start covering those costs.
Well, it makes sense. I mean, in all things, moderation, right?
Yeah.
So I guess when you're looking at the authority of the insurance commissioner, that's what we'd be talking about.
Yeah.
Does that actually have to come from the legislature, whatever authority that the insurance commissioner has?
There's a bill right now that has been filed to give the insurance commissioner more authority.
Okay.
I've not seen. I know it was filed Friday, or late Thursday, Friday. I've not looked at it enough to know, but I do know now the insurance commissioner has the ability, if he finds a rate to be excessive, and somebody comes to them and says, "I want this rate," and he says, "No, it's excessive," he can say no.
Okay.
So he does have authority right now.
Okay. Let's talk about it's a fiscal session coming up.
Yep.
So you're allowed to file 5 bills that are not fiscal. Just tell me about some of the bills you're going to have for this upcoming session.
Yeah, so we talked about my housing bill.
Great.
I've also got a bill that works with the Secretary of State to ensure that if an entity runs into a consent decree for some reason, where something to do with an election, whether it's redistricting, whether it's policies and procedures, it would require the legislature to approve that consent decree. That way we don't get a rogue Secretary of State, a rogue commission, something like that, agreeing to something that's going to bind the state in perpetuity, essentially, without the legislature having a say in it.
Okay.
So that's one of them. Another one deals with, it's an unfortunate situation where we figured out back in COVID, we passed laws that said you have to live stream and basically archive certain commissions and hearings and things, basically to allow more people to have access during COVID because public meetings were closed, things like that. One thing we didn't realize, the parole board has taken that to mean in situations where they're having hearings, those hearings are live streamed, they're archived online. It came to my attention that promises were being made to victims that their identities would be kept secret in some situations. Sexual assault victims, minors, things like that.
Right.
They go through the entire proceeding, the court proceedings, it's sealed, it's protected, they're not identified. Then they would get to the parole hearing and they would use people's real names. They would, basically the veil to protect the victim would be lifted. And so I'm bringing a bill to make sure that doesn't happen. That if the victim is a minor or it's a sexual crime, that same as during the proceedings where it's sealed, person's name is protected and identity is protected. Just horrible stories you could think of where somebody's a victim and then it pops up and they have essentially to relive all of these just unimaginable circumstances. And so
these sound like pretty good bills.
Thanks.
I mean, they do. I mean, they seem well thought out and very sensitive. So.
Yeah, and then I've got 2 that go to labor. One of them deals with workers' compensation audits and premiums. It's a cleanup bill that tweaks some stuff that I did last year. There was an error in the drafting, so we had to come back in. And then my last bill essentially says for teachers' unions, the teachers have to be given the option to opt out of the union every year.
Okay.
And that way, look, right now you don't have an option. You essentially you're in the union. This would allow a teacher to say, yes, take me out, or no, I want to stay in.
Well, look, we're down to we're down to our final minute or two here, but you mentioned the teachers, and so that's has become another it's become a problem with teacher raises after the constitutional amendment was voted down. I believe in large part because teachers, I don't know, maybe they got some bad information or something, but they thought they weren't going to get, there was going to be problems with their retirement in the future, or the raises weren't going to be guaranteed or whatever. In fact, that was the opposite, right?
Yeah, it was the opposite. And you said it. There was bad information. There was confusion. I'm not sure. I know I tried to tell as many people as I could that set the record straight. But it was one of those things, like, it snowballed into something, got out of control. But there is an amendment, or an amendment similar to the amendment language that would pay down the debt, the unaccrued liability debt, to allow teachers to have a pay raise. There's some bills out there for that, to do something similar. Last thing we want is our teachers not to get that $2,000 stipend, and our professionals that $1,000 stipend they've been having. The amendment that failed was a way to do that. Now we're trying to scramble and figure out a way to get them that stipend and make it permanent.
You got to come up with about $200 million to do that.
It's about $200 million. And look, you turn the TV on, federal government's cutting what they're sending to states. That's going to cause another deficit or reduce funding that we have. Amendment 2 had some other issues in it too, where higher ed is going to take a pay cut. It had a component that would have allowed parishes to take more money and retain more money from severance tax.
Yes, that was a big one.
That was a big one. Look, we would have gotten in Caddo Parish, I forgot the exact number, but it would have been a substantial amount of money. Some of that would have gone to the school systems. That could have been partially used for that. I think the biggest number I saw is DeSoto Parish was in line to get something around $40 million. So there is a bill coming back to try to deal with the severance and try to give more money back. But no, it's not a position we wanted to be in. It's obviously, if it would have passed, they would have had that stipend would have become a permanent pay raise from the locals, and it was guaranteed. Like I sat on the education committee. The bill came through that would have required the locals to pay them that amount, the stipend amount, as a permanent pay raise.
So now it's back to the square one on that one.
Back to square one, trying to figure out how to do it.
Sounds like you're working on it, though.
We are, yeah. Look, Chairwoman Emerson's great. She knows, she's been there long enough. She knows the ins and outs of everything, and I know she's on it, and she's trying to find a way to do it.
She sat in that chair about a week before, 10 days before the election, and told us all those very things. Look, we're out of time. Thank you, my friend.
Thank you.
Appreciate that.
Appreciate it.
State Representative Michael Melerine, representing District 6. You've been watching the app. You can catch it wherever you get your podcasts, and also on all KTBS digital platforms as well. So thanks for watching. Have a good one, everybody.